Welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Daniel Almaguer.
And today's topic will be featuring unbelievable host Justin Brierley, all the way coming in from the UK.
The UK?
Yes!
Justin Brierley! It's going to be an awesome episode. In Everyday Apologetics, we'll hear from Justin as he explains how dice point to God's existence.
In Science Faith Connection, Jeff will be talking with Justin about how to create conversations about faith.
First up is Culture Talk. Sandra will be interviewing Justin on whether it's rational to be a Christian. So let's go ahead and check it out.
Now it's time for Culture Talk, where we talk about culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined today with Justin Brierley. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a delight to be with you, Sandra.
Yeah,
Thank
you are an amazing speaker and author and also the host of the wildly popular Unbelievable show. So I'm so glad that you've come to visit us here.
I should employ you as my PR person,
yes,
Sandra.
I'm down.
Absolutely.
Take me to the UK. Well, you know, I've watched a number of your videos. First of all, they're very compelling, and I love how winsome you are when you're engaging others, especially those who don't share your belief. So I do want to talk about one of the videos that you have where you address, is it rational to be a Christian? And that seems to be kind of a starting point for a lot of people, that they won't engage faith because it's not rational. So before we unpack kind of why you feel like it is rational, let's first define, what do we mean by rational? What is and isn't rational?
Yeah, well, I would say simply to be rational is to have good reasons for believing something. Now, it doesn't always lead to those beliefs being true, but you can rationally believe something even when it's not true. You know, I could believe that my wife is at the hairdresser's because she told me she was going to be at the hairdresser's this afternoon, but in fact, maybe she changed her mind and she went to the shops instead. I'm still rational to believe she's at the hairdresser's, even if it's not the case. So in a sense, you know, we can all have reasonable beliefs. We can be a reasonable Christian. We can be a reasonable atheist. Reason isn't something that's only one set of people have. We can all act reasonably. We can all have good reasons to believe what we believe. The question, of course, is what's actually true, and do the reasons we have, are they the right kinds of reasons? And that's where we kind of have the conversations and we work out whether, or maybe the reason you believe that is actually not such a good reason. Maybe there isn't good evidence for that particular belief you have. Maybe it turns out that, you know, I was misinformed about my wife's hair appointment, and actually someone can tell me, oh, I saw her go over to the shop. So I have to change my belief. I have to use my reason and come to a different conclusion. And often that's what's happening, you know, in the shows, in the conversations that I host. It's about everyone. No one's saying everyone's being unreasonable or irrational, but we're all coming to the table and we're saying, let's look at the evidence and let's decide whether it's pointing towards God or it's pointing towards atheism. And I think we can all do that in a reasonable way, but we may come to different conclusions because we all weigh the evidence differently in the end.
No, and I appreciate that, because it is something where if you at first just have the conversation and say, well, let's lay it all out on the table and see what actually makes sense, you know. So inviting people to do that, I think, is so important, because sometimes we're just so set in our beliefs and we don't actually examine them beyond what we're used to hearing from
Absolutely.
others.
And I think it's really important, actually, that we're all humble enough to be willing to revise our views, to be open to different explanations, and to just, you know, because otherwise, you know, if we all went through life never being willing to change what we think about anything, you know, we'd lead very boring lives, wouldn't we? So I think it's important to always be open to other people and have genuine conversations.
Well, you know, one of the things that you talk about when you're explaining why it's rational, you give quite a few reasons why. You say that there are certain aspects of science that point to God, and specifically you've listed aspects such as cosmic fine-tuning, math, human value, human reason, and so forth. So can we unpack at least one or two of those? Let's start first with math. How does math point to God's existence?
It's an interesting one, because most people would say, well, what on earth does mathematics have to do with God, right? You know, 1 + 1 = 2. You know, it seems like a far remove from belief in a God behind the universe. But actually, it's fascinating when you actually dig down into this. And you know, one of the people who could speak brilliantly, I'm sure, on this is the founder of Reasons to Believe, Hugh Ross. But it's extraordinary when you look at the universe, the way it's been mapped out in a way that we can discover it and engage with it in the language of mathematics. Physics is based on this extraordinary parsimony and beautiful kind of set of equations and mathematical principles. And when you look at that, it's very hard to understand why the universe should be that way. There's no natural reason why the universe should be so eminently explorable through the language of mathematics, but yet it is. In fact, there was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist called Eugene Wigner who wrote a paper called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics. And he said it was nothing short of a miracle that the universe is describable in mathematical terms. He said there's no reason on a naturalistic worldview why this should be. At best, we can say it's a complete fluke. It's a happy accident. But actually, I think it points towards the fact that there is a designer. There is someone who kind of wrote laws into nature.
The ultimate mathematician.
Yeah, the ultimate mathematician behind the whole show. And I very often find even the most non-religious scientists and physicists talking in semi-religious terms about this extraordinary fact of nature, that it's written in the laws of mathematics. And I had on my show, one of my big conversation shows from Unbelievable, Sir Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. Extraordinary work in physics and astrophysics and mathematics. And he himself, as a non-Christian, said, it's one of the most remarkable things. It's the way that the natural world can be explored through the realm of mathematics. And he actually believes that actually there isn't just a physical world. He believes there is an actual world of mathematics, and there's an actual world of consciousness. And there's kind of he again gets quite religious in the language he uses. And for me, there's a natural explanation for this. It's God. There's a God from whose mind all of these realms evolve. These aren't just random happenstance. There's actually a real reason behind the way that all of these things coalesce and converge in ways that humans, with just these few pounds of grey matter, can actually understand the complexity of the universe.
Right. I love that. And just how you explained how explorable the world is through math. That's exciting. Yeah. Even though I'm not like a huge, really great at math.
I'm not great at maths either, but when I speak to people who are, they say, this is uncanny, this is weird. And I think it's an amazing kind of way into talking to people. You know, maybe you know people who are maths nerds. Yeah. Talk to them about this stuff. You never know where it may lead.
Right. No, that's so fascinating. So we've talked about math or maths. Now, can we talk about some cosmic fine-tuning?
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, you've got some experts here who could do that themselves. But one of the most popular videos I created was actually a video looking at the fine-tuning of the universe. And it is amazing when you look at the way the numbers behind the universe seem to be so incredibly finely tuned, dialed to just the right precision for things like the law of gravity, for instance, the force of gravity, for it to be just right so that when matter emerges in the universe, it doesn't either clump together too tightly so that nothing could emerge, so that the universe collapses back on in itself, but it's not weak enough that it all flies out. In fact, it's just the right amount of gravity so that chemistry, planets, galaxies can form and life can develop. That's just one of about 30 or so of these so-called very finely tuned laws and principles in the universe. And when you look at the numbers, it is staggering. It's incredible just how precise they have to be, just ever so slightly different than they actually are, and you would find that life wouldn't be possible. Right. I mean, I sometimes meet people who say, well, look, surely life could have developed. Maybe it'd be some different kind of life. Maybe, life would have found a way in the universe, even if things had been different. But the problem with that is, if you don't have this incredible fine-tuning to start with, you don't even get chemistry, basic chemistry. You don't have anything that you could even start with as the building blocks of life. And then you've got the whole question of how life arose, even once you've got all that initial stuff in place. So for me, this is very powerful evidence, actually, and I've met many atheists who take this very seriously, actually, as a very powerful potential argument for God, that there appears to be design at the right at the center of the universe, in the way that these physical laws, fundamental constants, seem to be perfectly synchronized to allow for life to develop. Was that just a fluke? the chances are so remote on that. It's just stacked so much against that possibility that just doesn't seem to be an option on the table. The only other way people have gone is maybe there's many universes, maybe there's a multiverse and lots of different numbers and laws, and we just happen to be in one where it worked in our favor. Again, interesting hypothesis, but not one that I find persuasive for a number of different reasons. But in the end, I think this is actually a very powerful argument for a God behind the universe, and I find that exciting. And more often than not, I find that for some types of people, especially people who have maybe a background in engineering, a background in science, this is a great conversation starter. Right. A lot of them, if you just walked up to them and said, "Do you believe in Jesus?" they'd immediately be, "I don't want to have this conversation."
It reminds me of those videos, like, "Do you have time to talk about our Lord and Savior?"
Yeah, exactly.
And the person's running away.
It's like, and the problem is that very often Christians kind of tend to confirm people's worst experiences immediately, and they think, "Oh no, it's one of those religious nuts," you know. But actually, if you start with something that maybe, "Oh yeah, no, that does sound interesting. Oh, I never thought about that." Right. Some kind of interesting scientific fact, it suddenly can open up a really interesting conversation that might eventually lead back to Jesus. Right. But at least you've got the door open, and I think the fine-tuning of the universe for life is just one of those fascinating scientific issues which actually just fascinates people. And which it's just a great tool. Right.
No, you bring up some wonderful points, because I think if you just go right in and say, "Let's talk about Jesus," you'll shut down conversation. But if you talk about, like the James Webb Telescope, those images are so beautiful and they're so stunning, and we all look at them and go, "What is that? Like, what does that mean? Where am I? Yeah. What am I doing here? And how did we get here?" Kind of a thing. Yeah. And starting there and talking about the vastness of the cosmos, talking about how intricate and fine-tuned it is. You just bring up such wonderful ways to have that conversation that's inviting.
It is about inviting people into a conversation. And God has given us actually some of the most amazing conversation starters you could hope for. Just look at the night sky above you on a clear night, and you've immediately got something to talk about, because people suddenly realize, gosh, who am I compared to this universe? Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful way to get into those conversations.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that. I know that our viewers are going to be, very interested in finding out more from you. So I'm going to point them to your website so they can find more information. If you want more from Justin Brierley, go to justinbrierley.com and check out his fascinating videos and also his show, Unbelievable.
Some people say that human existence is a result of a roll of the cosmic dice. Like the gambler who stakes his life savings on the next throw, we just got lucky in the lottery of life. Some people say there's no purpose in the universe, no grand plan, no God behind it all. Our numbers just came up and here we are. But I don't believe them, and nor should you. If I roll this dice, the chances of getting a 6 is 1 in 6. That's not too bad. But what are the chances of me rolling 6 twice in a row? Well, the odds get longer. It's 1 in 6 times by 1 in 6. That's 1 in 36. So I'd have to be pretty lucky to get 2 6s in a row. Now, every time I add the chances of rolling another 6 in a row, the odds go up exponentially, and it gets even more unlikely. Now, what if I rolled this dice 70 times and every single time I got a 6? Okay, that's pretty unlikely, but it's possible, right? Well, in fact, the chances of rolling a 6 70 times in a row are around 1 in 10 to the 55. That's a 1 with 55 zeros after it. Now, just to put that in perspective, how long would I have to stand here rolling this dice, allowing about 5 seconds per roll, before hitting that lucky streak and rolling 76s in a row? Well, I had a mathematician friend work it out for me. On average, you would have to continually roll this dice for 100 trillion, 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 trillion years before your numbers come up. That's a long time. What if you applied that thinking to us? What are the odds of us being here? Now, the odds of rolling 76s in a row, 1 in 10 to the 55, as it happens, those are the same odds of something called the expansion rate of the universe being just right for the existence of us here today. From the moment of the Big Bang, when our universe began to rapidly expand, the rate of that expansion was exquisitely finely balanced. Any faster, and the universe would have expanded too rapidly to allow the formation of chemicals, atoms, stars, and galaxies. Any slower, and the universe would have collapsed back in on itself. But as it happens, the universe expanded at just the right rate to allow for life to develop in the future, for us to be here. It hit 70 rolls of the number 6 in a row, first time. And the expansion rate of the universe is just one among 30 or so other incredibly sensitively finely tuned constants and fundamental forces in the universe that must be just the way they are for the universe to be able to produce us. So let's imagine, if I went ahead and rolled this dice 70 times, and what do you know, every time it came up 6. No waiting for trillions upon trillions of years, first time. Beginner's luck? Hardly. You would assume that I must have rigged it. Maybe the dice are loaded, maybe there are 6s on every side. It can't be chance. Now let me ask you, why would we assume that this universe with us in it, which is actually way more improbable than my 70 rolls, is just a result of chance? The fact that we're here shows that someone's loaded the dice. In fact, maybe there's no dice at all. What if the evidence points to this life-permitting universe actually being the product of an intelligent mind which intended for us to be here? Now, you could come up with some speculative other theory. Maybe there's an infinite number of universes, giving you an infinite number of chances to roll the dice. Maybe. But we don't have any scientific evidence for it. So if you're hanging your hat on that possibility, then you're every bit as much committed to a faith position as the person who says God was behind it. Believing in God isn't a delusion. It's a perfectly reasonable conclusion when we look at the fingerprints on our universe. And if it's true that we aren't just the fluke result of a cosmic roll of the dice, and that we're actually here because a grand designer intended us from the very beginning, well, that's worth staking something on.
Hello, Jeff Zwerink. Welcome back to Science Faith Connection, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific and philosophical ideas to help you see the truth of the Christian faith and be more confident to go out and share it. Today I'm excited. We're joined by Justin Brierley, host of The Unbelievable Show, and we get a chance to just talk about what are the status of apologetics and how can you interact with atheists and people with different worldviews. Justin, good to have you here today.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a delight to be with you.
I've enjoyed being on your show and getting to know you over a number of years. Why don't you just give our audience a little bit of what is Unbelievable and why did you decide to do that?
Well, Unbelievable as a radio show has been going for probably 16 years. So it started airing on Premier Christian Radio in the UK and really is the first show of its kind, I think, that existed in the UK because we don't have many Christian radio stations anyway, unlike in the US. And this was a show where we started bringing Christians and non-Christians together for dialogue and debate. And that has produced some wonderful conversations over the years, lots of interesting relationships with the various people who have come on. And over the years, the show went from being just a radio show to a podcast. So a lot of people starting to pick it up all over the world, including here in North America,
right.
And also a diversity of listeners. So not just Christians listening, but a lot of atheists and agnostics also tuning in. And so it's been a really interesting journey. And then we moved on to doing video as well. So a lot of people watch now the video shows that we do. We started putting on conferences. You, of course, have come over with Reasons to Believe to be part of some of those conferences. And there's been books and other resources that have come out of it. So, but at the heart of it all, it's about bringing different perspectives together to dialogue and debate and just see what happens in the process.
So I know you've been doing this for quite a while, and a few years ago you wrote a book about why you're still a Christian after having, because you've engaged with some pretty strong skeptics and I'm assuming heard pretty good arguments. So what have you learned, or what are the things that, as you've interacted with these different positions, that convinces you that Christianity is still every bit as true as we've always thought it has been?
And when I wrote that book, it was really because so many people were asking me that question. It was around the 10-year mark of the show, and they said, having had all of these atheists and well-known skeptics on, what still makes you convinced that Christianity is true? And so it was my attempt to kind of, boil down what I think some of the key arguments are for God, for Christianity, and to also, actively engage with the other side. I mean, one of the key things I realized, I think early on in doing the show, was that nobody comes to life with a blank slate, a neutral kind of perspective. We all come with a worldview, a way of looking at the world. And I think a lot of atheists assume that they're the neutral bystander and that the Christians have to do all the work of convincing them about these strange beliefs they have about God and heaven and the supernatural. Whereas in fact, what I discovered was that all of the atheists I was inviting on the show, they had their own particular set of beliefs. Very often it comes under the label of naturalism, that all that ultimately exists is matter in motion, the laws of nature, that everything is reducible to that. But that has all kinds of consequences to it. So it means that there is actually no such thing as beauty or love or right and wrong, justice. There's no ultimate purpose to the universe. It's come from nowhere, it's going nowhere in particular. There's all kinds of things that means. There's a whole set of beliefs that come with that naturalistic worldview. And I realize it's just as important for the skeptic, the atheist, to explain and justify their position as it is for the Christian to be able to give a defense of their position. And so the show's very much been about exploring both of those. Christians being challenged to defend and justify their beliefs, but atheists and naturalists being asked to give a reason for why they believe what they believe and whether it makes sense of the universe and life. And so in the book, I really took both of those positions and said, well, which position, naturalism or Christianity, makes best sense of the evidence that's available to all of us? And I looked at, in particular in the opening chapters, 3 things. Why I believe God makes better sense than atheism does of human existence. And that's very much a chapter that deals with some of the science of the fine-tuning of the universe and other issues that seem to point towards there being some reason behind the fact that we're here, that we're not here by dumb luck or blind chance. Then a chapter looking at God making sense of human value, that when we look inside ourselves, we find this innate belief in the dignity and value of human beings. And can that be explained on an atheistic or naturalistic worldview? And I don't think it can. But I think there's a ready explanation if we believe in a God who created us and endowed us with his image. And finally, human purpose, this kind of this search for meaning and transcendence that seems to inhabit every time, place and culture. Could it be that that has an object that meets it? On an atheistic worldview, no, it's in another illusion. It's just another blind alley. But actually on the Christian worldview, no, it does make sense. That innate sense that people have that there must be more is met in someone who does offer far more. So for me, there's a number of different lines of evidence which point to Christianity making better sense. It's not a knockdown proof, but it is just a sense that there's a coherence to the Christian story that for me fits better with the world around us.
You know, one of the things that I'm listening to you describe this that just I think is fascinating and really resonates with me is if I get what you're saying, it's like, hey, let's make sure we understand the totality of what we're talking about here. We're not just going to talk about, is there fine-tuning and does this evidence point for or against and restrict to that, as fun as that little argument is. We have to step back and say, okay, if we take the Christian worldview, what comes with that? The good, the bad, the challenging, and everything. And we have to do the same thing with naturalism, which has that seems to have a profound implication for how we prepare and think about conversations. So how would you encourage a conversation or a Christian to prepare for those kinds of conversations?
And I think this is critical because so often I think in quote unquote apologetics, we kind of deal in arguments, but we don't deal in conversations very much. And actually life is made of conversations, not just clever arguments. And so what we've tried to do on the show especially is model what these arguments look like when they are put into a conversational format, when you're going back and forth. And that's as much about listening to the other person as it is about putting your case to that person. I want to understand, firstly, what that other person actually believes. I don't want to assume that I know their position. And often the most interesting part of the conversation is when I'm asking questions of the atheist or the agnostic, tell me about why you believe, or what you don't believe in, and why, but where you think that things like human value come from, why we should act in certain ways towards each other. I want them to tell me, how they ground those beliefs. And then that can be the start of a really interesting conversation. So I want it to be a two-way dialogue in that way. And I equally will invite the questions, about Christianity and why you believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, why you believe that the Bible points towards the resurrection of Jesus, all those sorts of important questions. But I want it to be both and, so that we feel that there's a genuine dialogue between the two parts. And I found that to be a really interesting way of opening it up, and it makes a big difference, I find.
Well, and it just seems to flow out of First Peter 3:15. That we're prepared to give a defense for the hope that's within us. I mean, we got to have the hope, but then we got to be prepared to defend it. But then there's this other step of being able to share and care about and engage with the other person's thinking, not just here's my knockdown case, listen to it, be irrational or become a Christian type mentality.
And it's that end bit of the verse, isn't it, with gentleness and respect, and that's it's got to be about the way you present things. It's not just the arguments you make; it's the way you make those arguments. And for me, that's half of the thing with the Unbelievable show, has actually been modeling not just arguments but conversations where there's a genuine give and take, there's a genuine graciousness, where people on diametrically opposed points of view can actually still have a really fruitful conversation. And that's a very exciting place to be, because I think a lot more happens in that moment than just a sterile argument. There's a kind of meeting of minds. There's people get on with each other, friendships are made, relationships happen, and that's when something dynamic can happen.
Well, and I find that fascinating, just because, at least I know you go back not too many years ago in the U.S., and you could really have diametrically opposed views, but they still enjoy being together with one another. And it seems like we're losing that. So I think Unbelievable is doing a great service by modeling that.
Well, it's interesting, because at the same time that Unbelievable has grown, so the polarization in popular culture has gotten worse and worse. And I think social media is driving a lot of that, the way that enables people to kind of be anonymous and just throw verbal hand grenades at each other. It's much harder to be impolite to someone that you're sitting down with and having a conversation. And that's the beauty of the Unbelievable show. I think it does force people to take each other seriously, to not just write each other off, to kind of paint cardboard caricatures of each other, but to have genuine conversations. And I think we're desperate for that in our culture, and we do need more of it.
Well, thanks, Justin. I appreciate your comments a lot. As a Christian, we are convinced that Christianity is true, and other people have different worldviews. And part of what we need to do is, one, understand our worldview so that we can articulate and defend it, but also learn how to be in conversations with people who have different worldviews. I would encourage you. Justin Brierley and the Unbelievable show and podcast is a great resource for modeling that. Go check out the internet, look up Unbelievable, check and see how Justin's done that, so that you can be better equipped to engage in these important conversations about the truth of Christianity.
We hope this episode has helped equip you to share your faith with compassion and confidence.
And you know what? I know that we had so many wonderful conversations with Justin. It was great to hear him really unpack this comfort that he has with challenges, being able to say, hey, I don't know the answers quite yet, or sure, I'll take some lumps, and just let people process their challenges against the Christian faith, and then be at peace and have a calm conversation with people.
Exactly. I thought it was so great how he was talking about there's space to be able to talk to people and to address their doubts and their issues with Christianity, but also just be like, hey, this is what I know, this is what I believe, and respect what they know and what they believe too. So I thought the whole episode was great.
Oh yeah, and even just understanding that the Christian faith is a livable worldview. That was also, I think, really, really helpful.
Right.
So if you enjoy conversations like this, be sure to subscribe to the show, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at 2819 Show.
And if you would like the audio version of the show, you can find us on most major podcast services. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
See you next week.
See ya.